Hype Network presents.
On this episode of Season 4, let's talk.
So sometimes you need to start it and then eventually over time because you're trying to learn, you learn from your mistakes. Eventually you have more practice, you become better at it. And then perfection is now chasing you, no? So that, yeah, that's how I approach it.
Before we get into this episode, make sure to share this with your family and friends. And if you want to connect with me, you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at The Rajiv Show. Hey folks, welcome back to The Rajiv Show, and I'm your host Rajiv Doreswamy. And this show aims to help reach out to those who are currently struggling in life and to remind you that life is indeed beautiful when you're inspired to make it your own. Hey folks, welcome back to the Rajiv Show, and another fellow from the podcast PH and podcast Philippine Podcast Directory guest is here with me, Iks Reyes, the host, the man behind the Inspiring Leader podcast. I wanna have a conversation with him. There's a reason behind that, but we'll get into that. But first, let me introduce my guest, Iks Reyes. Iks, how you doing, pal?
I'm doing good. It's a pleasure to be here in your show, Rajiv.
Anyway, before we get into the conversation, could you give a little bit of background to my listeners about you?
Okay, I'm a very experienced person, so which means I'm quite old now. But the way I would summarize my my introduction would be: I'm a marketing practitioner by day and a podcaster by night. So I run the social media community, The Inspiring Leader, and I host the Inspiring Leader podcast. That's
Wow.
it.
Like it sounds like a Bruce Wayne kind of thing. I'm getting the Bruce Wayne kind of vibes. You know, the morning routine, Bruce Wayne by day and Batman by night. that, that's the coolest opening that I've ever heard in the Rajiv show. Anyway, um,
Wow.
I gotta ask the question that I ask, of course, is that if you and I were high school, who were you in high school? Were you the quiet type in the corner, or were you the sporty guy? You know, always with the chicks and focusing on sports. If you and I were classmates, who were you in high school? I gotta ask.
I think if we were classmates, we'd probably be in a band together. So I'm not the athletic jock, no, although I play sports when I was in high school. When I was in high school, I was actually competing in practical shooting
Ooh, wow.
because my dad was a competitive shooter. No? So my dad was a SEA Games gold medalist in shooting, and also I picked up that practice. I picked up that sport. No, but in school, I wasn't the athletic one. No, so I'm not also the geeky person, or I'm not the intelligent one. No,
Really?
although I have relatively good grades. I have relatively good grades, but I'm not the honor student. I was not
Valedictorian?
the candidate for valedictorian. No, I was not that type. But I did. When I was younger, I did try out for the choir,
Hmm.
and then when I was in high school, I had a band. I
Ooh,
had a band.
wow.
So we'd probably be bandmates. You'd be playing the guitar, and I'd be playing the bass.
Oh, you're the base. Wow, this is this opened up into the conversation that I didn't expect. Because my latest conversation in one of my episodes, I spoke to my dad. He and I are bass players. This is funny. You opened up into the bass, and yeah,
Oh, really?
yeah, and although yeah, I haven't been playing bass for almost a long time. I've always
Mm-hmm.
seen myself as a second generation bass player, and this is an opening conversation. We gotta address this. What got you into the bass, man? That's that's one of the interesting questions that I first had in mind.
You know what? I don't really know. My first thought was because I asked that myself.
Hmm.
Um, and my first thought was that there were so many very good guitar players
Ah, yeah, yeah.
that I ended up just playing the bass. No, but of course, when when you're a bass player, you know that you're the one carrying,
The groove,
together with
yeah,
the
that's
drummer,
true.
you're the one carrying the band. No?
Yeah,
But um, and it's basically because I'm very talented at carrying the whole rhythm,
yeah,
the whole tune, of the band. That it's very critical, for a bass player to be really doing their work. So of course the lead people, whether that's the singer, that's the guitarist, they can
yeah,
all go off by themselves.
yeah.
But it's always you that maintains, the integrity of the song, the
The
integrity of the
foundation.
performance. It relies on the bassist. Even at times, the drummer actually relies on the bassist. So the role is very important. No, but I uh, even when I was in college, I still played the bass. I played a little bit of drums when I was in college.
Yeah.
But what I like about being able to play bass is that because it's the foundation of the song, right?
Hmm.
So the
Hmm.
bass is the foundation of the song, and that actually helped me, write songs. So sometimes I write songs.
Really?
I have a couple of, not really a couple actually. I have
Hmm.
a dozen of songs that are out there.
Hmm.
Not professionally produced songs, but nice
Yeah.
songs that I like to play every now and then.
Yeah. Wait, you compose via the bass, or you start from the bass and then you build it up with the
No,
guitar?
no, not really. But because bass is usually like you have the foundation of the songs, right? So
True.
sometimes when it's hard for me to catch a tune, so
Yeah.
I do it over the bass first, and then
Ah.
I add the chords eventually. So
Ah. Okay.
you play the bass notes, and then you to set the foundation, and
Yeah.
then you uh, and then you start with the chords again, and then
Yeah.
over time you now produce the songs. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. And I'm sure when you started the band, were you, because the famous stories from famous bass players that I've known over the years is that they never. There are a lot of people who never start out playing the bass because one is they don't know the main component of it, which I'm sure you mentioned. When you started out, did you start out rhythm wise? Because there's this story, a conversation also from my dad. I'm sure you've heard of the band Black Sabbath. Black Sabbath.
Yeah.
The bass player Geezer Butler. It's funny
Hmm.
when they got together. He used to be the rhythm guitarist, and then I think when Tony Iommi became the lead guitarist, and he decided to take over the bass, he played it in his own way by imitating. And no, and then that's where he came with he came up with the original style of how he plays, which is kind of the fast, and it became the solid foundation for metal music. So when you started out,
Hmm.
did you start out playing rhythm first, or it was an attraction to that four string? I gotta ask. The follow up question to that is it did you start out
Yes.
with the four
So
string or the six string?
that's
Yeah,
actually surprising. No, I never got to the six string. So during my time, it was a
yeah,
couple of decades ago.
yeah,
Uh, Only four string was standard. No, six string was it's like you will be part of the cool group if you had a six string
yeah,
bass. So during my time, it was just four strings, and
yeah,
then yes, I started with rhythm.
yeah,
And then eventually you play bass, following a rhythm, and then eventually you improvise. No,
yeah,
eventually
yeah,
you pick up a few tricks here and there,
yeah,
so you learn how to snap and slap, and then all
yeah,
those things. So
yeah,
you start to add a little bit dimension to how you
yeah.
play. But yes, I did start playing more of a rhythm type, and then I
Interesting.
transitioned to the bass.
Wow.
Yeah.
This first half just became an opening opening weird stuff. It's weird base, we can talk about base. Like in this entire episode can be based around base. But let's put base aside for a moment. You mentioned shooting.
Yeah, sure.
Now that's a bit scary. I mean, what's your definition of shooting? And how did that happen? Shooting, uh, is it the shooting with the rifle and
Shooting,
everything? The shooting kind of thing?
shooting guns, bullets, usually handguns.
Oh,
So my father's a SEA Games gold medalist in practical shooting. So
yeah,
practical pistol course.
yeah,
That's the event, the practical pistol course.
yeah,
So he handles a revolver.
yeah,
Sometimes we handle a pistol.
yeah.
So so any type, 9 millimeter,
Mm,
a 45, no, a 38 revolver. So I've handled that. So that's the one I've been doing for the most part when I was in high school. So I was into shooting.
yeah.
I even create my own bullets.
Really?
So I reload. We have a reloader back at home,
Yeah,
in that at that time.
yeah.
And then so I create my own bullets and I save up on that because I was the one who created the bullets. So
Wow.
less cost for us when we do
Wow.
practice. So I compete every month. So
Mm,
I go to the province, and I was for a
yeah,
time I was a class A shooter
yeah,
for our region
yeah.
at that time.
Wow. Now I don't want to mess with you.
Yeah.
Shooting base is like wow, two weird different. And aside from, I'm new. I'm new to the idea of shooting as a sport. My impression of
Hmm.
shooting is, of course, my knowledge of shooting is duck hunting. I'm sure that was popular in England, and that's my impression. When you said the word shooting, I thought you guys were using shotguns and stuff like that. Are there specific ranges from
Yeah,
thing?
there's an event actually. There's an event using shotguns. There's an event using rifle.
Hmm.
There's also an Olympic event. I also did air pistol, but the Olympic style of air
Yeah,
pistol shooting, not just the backyard air pistol shooting. So I also
yeah,
did some training. Back then, I've met some athletes, gold medal athletes
yeah.
from the Philippine team, and yeah, there are lots of different types of events in shooting.
And the shooting, how do you guys? I I got this weird interest now in shooting thanks to you. Is that
Hmm.
when you guys compete? What what do you guys do? I mean, I know it sounds like a very newbie question to ask. Like, I know when it comes to the shotgun, you have the flying plates. That's how I imagine the shotgun thing. But
Okay.
when it comes to pistol, is that the range thing where the thing the target comes forward and stuff like that? Is that the how you guys play it?
There are events. There are events that have moving targets. No, so
Okay.
there are events that would be confined more inside a traditional range where
Huh.
there's like a clothesline,
Hmm.
across all the way towards the end, and then
Yeah.
the paper target comes forward. So when
Yeah.
I did Olympic style air pistol shooting,
Yeah.
and that's usually how it's done. But then
Yeah.
there are also events that are more like outdoors,
Yeah.
and then like you run around and
Really?
shoot at paper targets, shoot at steel targets. So there are also those types of events.
Wow. Wow. And I gotta ask. Of course, sports. It's more like an art form. And I gotta ask, do you have when you used to compete with shooting, do you have a ritual when you get into the game? It's like I'm sure when you get into the game and you're competing, do you have this certain mindset, where you target this goal and then what goes through your mind before and during and after when you're competing? I gotta ask.
There are a lot of things that would go through your mind, before you actually start.
Hmm.
Especially when when it's an outdoors competition where you have to run
Hmm.
and you have to engage targets, and there are, like certain obstacles that you need to go through,
Hmm.
because you need because remember, you're handling a very dangerous
It's true. It's
tool,
true.
right? So
Yeah.
you need to be very aggressive if you want to be competitive. So you
Hmm.
have to run fast, you have to
Hmm.
shoot fast, but
Yeah.
then you have to be careful as well. No, so
Yeah.
definitely you run through all the scenarios, no, all those things, all the targets, things that you need
Yeah.
to hit, some obstacles that you need to overcome. So
Yeah.
there has to be a lot of focus, no. So you have to uh, go through everything in your mind, and
Hmm.
sometimes you need to literally just run through it a
Hmm.
couple of times before you start, no, so
Hmm.
that you're really focused, you're really into it,
Hmm.
and taking into account all the safety measures, that you need to
Yeah.
follow.
Yeah. When you get into the field, and or where you get into the area where you guys, do you guys have an open opportunity to scout the area first and plan your strategies, or when you're in the game, you're already there, you're laser focused, and you improvise as you
Well,
uh, get into the thing.
yeah. Well, usually planning when you're like in competitions, and I'm relaying this, based on my observations of my father, because
Yeah.
he's really the class A shooter. But
Wow.
usually the preparation starts
Huh.
way before the competition, because usually the organizing committee would send out a description of the course. So
Okay.
when you practice, you already try to simulate, the competition, know all
Yeah.
the conditions, where the targets are,
Yeah.
where the obstacles are.
Yeah.
So you already do that. But then sometimes, if you're really very competitive, you turn up to the event early, so
Yeah.
that you can view, yeah, if you need to make some adjustments. So all those
Wow.
things. No, so yeah,
Wow. This is interesting. From what I heard, it's really really fascinating. And the way I hear it, it's kind of connected to life itself. I mean, you gotta understand variables, you gotta plan ahead, and that's one thing I find inspiring with you. That's why I respect you, and I admire you as a podcaster, and saying as a fellow colleague in the podcasting community. Is that interesting? Age, and the ability to sing. Wow. I have no more words to add into that. That's really fascinating. I mean, I've never been into a shooting competition. I try to avoid it as much as possible. But it's
yeah.
fascinating.
Well, if it's not exactly shooting at each other, though. So
Yeah.
that's so we're just shooting paper targets,
Yeah.
etc. Just need to
Yeah.
exercise, a lot of diligence in terms of
Yeah.
safety. You need to be certified in some way to
Mm,
handle a gun.
mm,
And then I had the benefit, of having a father who's really into it. He's
mm,
very passionate about the sport, who excelled in his sport. No, so I was
mm.
just along there for the ride. No, and it
Wow.
was really a good experience. And sometimes it comes in handy. Sometimes
Yeah.
there would be a fun event where you can
Yeah.
shoot, and then it's
Yeah.
always nice to be able to be part of the better ones, shooting. So like before, I recently, I think it was like last year, we
Yeah.
had I haven't I haven't shot a gun like in maybe 5 or more years. And
Yeah.
then they had an invitational, and I placed second in that event. Oh no,
Wow.
it was third. I think third. I placed third in that event.
Yeah.
So, and that's because, of course, there's a lot of things, the quality of competition,
Yeah.
etc. And then, but everything is really just based on my experience before. So I'm
Huh.
always able to draw from that experience when I was younger, and
Huh.
just apply all the basics. So, and apply
Wow.
all the basics, and then eventually, you always see the results, and you're
Yeah.
always part of the better shooters,
Yeah.
in the field.
Yeah. I gotta ask. I'm sure when it comes to age, you gain wisdom, especially with experience. Do you have a particular story when you started out, playing the game, learning the game? Of course, you mentioned your dad, class A shooter. But when you started out, were there this kind of failures, pivotal moments where you said, "Oh man, this is tough. I can't do this," and then somehow you managed to motivate yourself in order to get through that phase, and then started competing and then getting better. Is there a phase, a story that you have?
Well, there's one thing that I remember, because sometimes when you're because shooting is not a cheap sport, right?
Yeah,
So you meet a lot of rich kids,
yeah,
back in the day, and
yeah,
usually they would have top of the line stuff. They would have
yeah,
nice belts and holsters. They would
yeah,
have nice shirts. They would be wearing I forgot the the eyewear, the protective eyewear that they're wearing.
yeah.
But it's they would be wearing the top end brand, no,
Wow.
nice caps with lots of pins, no. So
Yeah,
and sometimes you get intimidated,
yeah,
looking at these people. They have so many nice, shiny, brand new things.
yeah,
And then my key takeaway back then is because my father was really more. He spends if it's necessary, but as
yeah,
much as possible, he tries just to fix it on his own, or he tries to create or invent a contraption by himself, something like
really.
that. So,
Wow.
but what I learned from him was that you shouldn't be intimidated by people who have, nice tools, nice shiny things, because that doesn't mean that they're actually good at
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
No, so it would still rely on the person shooting the gun. No,
yeah,
so just make sure that you put in the work, you
yeah,
practice, and
yeah,
then you focus on the basics.
yeah,
Make sure that you have a good mindset coming into, in terms
yeah,
of preparation, running through
yeah,
everything, etc. And that
yeah,
will determine who the better person is, not actually the tools that you are
yeah,
using, if it's brand new or not, if it's high end or not, if it's branded or not.
yeah,
No, so that's one thing that I remember, because before, especially when you were younger, right? You look
yeah,
at other
yeah,
people and you say, "Wow,
yeah. I know the
nice!
feeling.
He's
Yeah,
using this. He's using." Yeah,
yeah,
so those stuff, but it doesn't matter. So I think if it applies, no, in podcasting, like
yeah,
even if someone is using a mobile phone and an earphone
yeah,
versus someone who has the whole set, with all the
yeah,
microphone. But if you're not putting in the research, if you're not churning out the content,
yeah,
if you're not publishing enough material,
yeah,
then who would be the better podcaster, right? No,
yeah.
so
It's true. It's
so
true.
again, it will all boil down to the
Yeah,
basics and to the commitment to the game.
yeah. Wow, this is powerful. I like how you shot into the you shot into the philosophy through music, sports, and I like how the bullet pierced through every single thing and kind of made the ripple effect. It's kind of interesting. Interesting. Wow, I'm blown away. I'm blown away. Um, Before we continue this conversation, we're gonna go on a short break, folks. We're gonna come back after these few short messages. If you want a great vacation place this summer, we got a sweet deal for you. La Casa Vacance in Batangas is a great place for your family to relax and enjoy. Go to pipenetwork.co/ La Casa Vacance to use the promo code PRS to get 300 pesos per booking. And don't forget to follow national safety protocols, folks. Cheers and enjoy your stay.
This is Mike and Ham from Please Pause. Meron kaming munting podcast where we talk about all things TV and film. And despite that, surprisingly, we are still married.
Control freak ka kasi sa podcast na to.
30 seconds lang po ang meron tayo. Pakibilisan.
From blockbusters to classics, superheroes to love teams, hit series to teleseries, join us as we have meaningful and meaningless conversations on the stuff we watched. Someday, mababago ka rin ang tagline na yan.
Check out Please Pause on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and other major podcast platforms.
See you there!
Hey folks, welcome back to the Rajiv show. My guest, Iks Reyes, we just spoke about bass and shooting and motivation. There was a lot of motivational content that I'm sure you guys picked up. And one thing I wanted to add in this conversation is that when you transition from shooting and sportsman, and of course the motivation and everything, when you transition from sports in that area and then you applied it in bass, did you have the same mentality that you had, the habits that that you've picked up from shooting into bass as well, in a creative way?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, of course, in everything, it would always be best if you would have the time to prepare, no, and then eventually see through something. Also, the mental preparation side. So it's one thing to practice physically,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
also it's one thing to visualize all the things that you are doing. And there's a material that I came across before that two things are created twice. So I think it came from Stephen R. Covey. So things are always created twice. No, first in the mind, and then second, the physical creation or the performance of things. No, so and it was always a nice discipline to acquire, to visualize things first before actually doing it. And I was able to apply it in different things, not just in playing bass, not just in creating songs, no, not just in presenting in meetings. No, sometimes I go to sleep just thinking about how I will perform my day, and I think it really helps me execute, the finer details of what I want to do.
Would you consider yourself a perfectionist when you mention details, when you execute your stuff, or you improvise things through when you execute, especially in music, and you mentioned podcasting and other stuff.
I wouldn't consider myself a perfectionist, but I do go into detail
Hmm.
because usually I'm always curious about, the
Hmm.
finer things, no,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
finer things. So I'm always curious about that, but I don't, because I have a saying: don't chase perfection,
Hmm.
let perfection chase you. No, I always say that comes from me. You can quote me on that.
I will. I
Um,
will.
don't don't chase perfection. Don't chase perfection. Let perfection chase you. Meaning,
Yeah.
if you always aim for perfection, sometimes it hinders you
Yeah.
from pursuing things or even just starting out things. Like
Yeah.
for a particular project, if it has to be perfect,
Hmm.
if you want to start out a podcast episode and you don't want to mumble, you don't
Hmm.
want a repetitive phrase, you don't want to you don't want those types of words like oofs, you won't
Yeah.
be able
Yeah.
to finish a podcast episode. So sometimes you need to start it, and then eventually
Yeah.
over time, because you're trying to learn, if you learn from your mistakes,
Yeah.
eventually you have more practice, you
Yeah.
become better at it, and then perfection is now chasing you.
Yeah.
No, so
Becomes
that's
second
yeah,
nature.
that's how I approach it.
Yeah.
Yes, yes,
S-
it's not that you become perfect,
Yeah.
but you get as close to perfection as you would want to be. No, but it always starts with you just putting yourself out there,
Hmm.
and then eventually trying to improve.
Wow. Powerful. Powerful. Let's transition back into bass. I mean, I gotta ask. Bass, of course. When I started out playing bass, I think I mentioned this in a couple of episodes in my history. Is that I never started out playing bass at first. I started out playing guitar, and from then on out,
Mhm.
I transitioned into bass during this one incident where my dad brought home a custom-made bass guitar, and that's where my fascination for the low-end strings, four-string bass, was began in my fascination for that. And it so happened my dad made me a custom-made bass guitar. I think it's somewhere here at home, where it's the size of an electric
Wow.
guitar, and although it
Mhm.
has its flaws, I still have the fascination for the four strings. I mean, it's funny when I transitioned playing classical guitar in college.
Mhm.
It
Yeah.
is more pleasing to hear the bass than it is to hear the B and E string in the guitar. And with that, I gotta ask, what are your top three types of music when it comes to playing? I mean, what is the genre that you love the most? The top three.
Okay. Um, I wouldn't say genre, but I'd probably maybe give you like bands or maybe musicians that I'd like to listen to.
Sure.
Uh, when I was younger,
Hmm.
and this was back in the 80s, right? And new wave was the standard, right? They
Yeah.
were the yeah they were the mainstream music, new
Yeah.
wave. But I wasn't listening to new wave. I was listening to Queen.
Ooh,
I was
Queen.
listening to
Okay.
Queen.
Good
Yeah,
stuff. Good
because I
stuff.
was always outside. I was always outside. I see a bunch of men, a bunch of guys playing guitar. They
Yeah.
were singing to the song hits. No, they were doing the song hits, and they
Yeah.
weren't they weren't into new wave because those were for the younger people back then. They were into um, they went to Queen, they went to Led Zeppelin, all those things.
Yeah.
So I was always listening to them, play the songs, with their acoustic guitars.
Uh,
So I was that's one thing that very influential to me. So
yeah.
those slow rock, slow rock things, and then the next would be the folk rock and country songs like
John
maybe a
Denver.
James Taylor song.
Ah.
John Denver, of course, would be a standard.
Yeah.
I'm well,
Filipino.
I know.
The when see in La Trinidad, I'm sure if you've traveled to La Trinidad, the funny thing about La Trinidad is that country is very dominant. I'm sure you've been. Yeah, I'm Baguio.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
It's funny
yeah,
when
yeah.
you
Uh,
when you the expectation of an Igorot here in terms of fashion and everything is jeans and boots and everything, hat and everything, the
yeah,
cowboy lifestyle.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So John Denver
yeah.
triggered.
Actually, I
Yeah.
have a couple of relatives in Baguio, and one of my cousin, Chikoy. My cousin was into guitars,
Yeah.
at that time.
Yeah.
And yeah. Eh, yeah, so what else? So definitely slow rock, and the second would be folk and country.
Hmm.
And then I really like uh Billy Joel.
Billy Joel, the piano.
Billy Joel songs. Yeah, The
Oh,
Piano Man, or yeah, yeah, Billy Joel songs.
yeah.
So I like those. So if I were to boil it down into artists,
Yeah.
I really like Queen,
Yeah.
James Taylor, and Billy Joel. No, so those are the type of music that I listen. But of course, I listen to everything. I listen to a lot of YouTube. Of course, Beatles would always be there.
Yeah.
Um, what else? Even Pitbull. I listened to a lot of Pitbull before. so,
Is,
so
yeah. How about you mentioned 80s? Did you reach the time of the early era Michael Jackson, Prince era sing
um,
music?
yeah, yeah. I like them both. No, I
Yeah.
like them both. Very talented, very prolific in terms of their music.
Yeah.
Um, I'm a fan, but not really. I'm not really into it. like Michael
Hmm.
Jackson and Prince, not really into their music. So
Hmm.
not yeah, not really. But I'm sure I know most of their songs.
Yeah.
So because of the song hits era, because
Yeah.
before
Yeah.
you
The book.
you buy a book
Yeah.
like a 2-inch thick book, and then
Yeah.
you go through. So sometimes it's very natural for me to, like, when you say the name of the song,
Yeah.
I know who wrote it. I know
Yeah.
who the artist is. So
Yeah.
but now I'm losing my touch because there's so many songs already,
Yeah.
and uh, so I tend to forget everything now. But before, I used to know a lot. So I even actually at one time I was at the Hard Rock Cafe.
Yeah.
I was at the Hard Rock Cafe together with the love of my life, and
Yeah.
there was a radio show that was there, and they were conducting a contest. Like, you
Yeah.
have to name this tune and who the artist is. So she volunteered me in, and actually won it.
Yeah. Really?
I won in that contest. So I think I had a mug, a shirt,
Yeah.
and a glass, so eyeglasses. So I won there. So easily, I won it easily because they were playing old songs.
Yeah.
So I won it easily.
It was home court advantage, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you experimented with with funk by any chance? Because for me, I'm a big funk guy. When I started out the conventional way of playing bass, I didn't start off with the plucking, the standard plucking bass thing.
Yeah,
I was introduced to jazz funk, Marcus Miller, and with the slapping technique. That's
yeah,
how I got into it. And then when
yeah,
I dug deep during my lost years, I dug deep into the the history behind the idea of slap. It came from the funk revolution. It was a technique that defined the voice of the 80s sing, Sly and the Family Stone, Larry Graham's sing. And the
yeah,
history is really
yeah.
interesting. Um, in a nutshell, the story was when Larry Graham and his mom, they used to have a band, and I
Mhm.
think they had a drummer also. There was a time when the drummer walked out, and yeah, there was, and I think Larry Graham at the time was playing guitar. I think it was drums, or yeah, it was drums. So when Larry Graham was transitioned into the drums, he and then went back into something like that. I forgot how the story went, but in the end, he kind of formulated his own technique, which is the slap, and of course the thumb and the pluck,
Yeah.
and that's to imitate the
Hmm.
drums. And from then on out, he
Hmm.
took that to Sly and the Family Stone, and of course they made records, they made
Yeah.
hits, and that's where the funk revolution began. And then Prince, and of course all these other guys like Primus. That's where I started out. I started playing plusing. I remember the bulges in my thumb when when I started out the first. It was
Yeah.
always gonna be the toughest challenge. And then after some few times, it becomes you get used to it. And then it's
Mhm.
funny. I've tried fretless during sing, but I've never really spent time figuring it out because the frequency it's very hard.
Yeah.
When you've mastered the 12 tone system, your ears are saying, and in the fretless, one mistake can lead you to a microtone from away from the sing. And yeah, microtones, that's another conversation that's very complicated to explain. But yeah, and that's the history of where I got into bass. And it kind of served
Hmm.
me well. Throughout the time, I've never played it conventionally.
But if I were to answer you, because you kind of went into the topic of like slapping. When did I try the when I tried to like use the slapping technique and
Yeah,
those things. So
yeah,
usually when we started the band, we were playing more of Van Halen, those things. So there
yeah,
weren't really opportunities, to
yeah,
slap the bass. But there was a song because
uh,
we were also fans of local bands, and we were fans of the Dawn. If you're familiar with the band The Dawn,
Sounds familiar.
Salamat,
Yeah,
Enveloped Ideas, no?
yeah,
The
yeah,
Dawn band.
yeah,
Yeah. So anyway, they had this song Behind Shadows.
yeah,
No, so if maybe you could, YouTube it one of these days,
yeah.
and it has a lot of, slapping bass, not really funk,
Mm,
not really funk, um, but he utilizes a lot of, plucking, slapping there,
yeah,
and I tried to imitate that song. I tried to
really.
imitate that. That's when I tried, the slapping technique.
And then,
But most of the time we were playing 38 special, etc. Yeah,
yeah,
so not really much opportunities for me to
yeah,
to do it. But
yeah,
I remember playing the song Behind Shadows. That's where I tried to experiment more in
yeah,
terms of how to play the bass.
yeah. Did you? I'm
Yeah.
sure. This next question is much more on the scarcity of technology back then, prior to what we have
Mhm.
now. Did you have the gadget and all the setup, or you were just, plug and play?
No, no, no. Plug and play. I wanted to invest in gadgets, but I didn't get to because by the time that I was in college,
Hmm.
I played the bass a little, and then eventually I shifted to the drums
Hmm. Hmm.
because we had a bass player that was better. So I moved into the drum
Yeah.
section.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so yeah, but really, eventually I consider myself not really a musician.
Yeah.
I don't consider myself a singer, but really more of a I'm an aspiring songwriter.
That's a nice
That's how
way.
I
That's a nice way of
that's
putting it.
how I consider myself. No, I'm more of an aspiring songwriter than
Yeah.
really a musician.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
Interesting.
what happens is I don't consider myself as having a widow.
Yeah.
I sometimes I can, of course I have that, basic, I can follow notes, I can replicate notes, or those things, but I'm
Hmm.
not really as talented as others.
Hmm.
And I think that actually helped me because I don't know how to replicate notes.
Hmm.
So eventually I just create my own rhythm, I create
Hmm.
my own notes, and I think that helped me generate, a lot of songs.
Yeah.
So like very very easily I can, not really easily, but I don't know if it's luck or something, but I can create tunes, very
Yeah.
quickly.
Yeah. Interesting. And of course, during that timeline, I'm sure you guys, listening was very much more important when it comes to sing. And I think the records back then was vinyl. Was it vinyl back in your time when you guys were playing music,
Yeah.
or transitioning into the tapes?
Oh, um I think tapes already by the
Yeah.
time that I was born.
Yeah.
But when I go to my grandfather's house, they would be full of vinyl records. I even remember they had hmm, what do you call this? Not Hagibis, but the other band, the one where there's Pepe Smith and Mike Hanapol. What band was that?
And probably not my time. uh,
Yeah, yeah, not your time, definitely, but they're more the classic trios, band trios. My lolo even has a record of that.
yeah.
No, but by my time, it was already the standard cassette tape.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what
Oh,
I already.
interesting. Interesting. And this is one, probably, if my listeners have reached this portion, this is one of the most important question I gotta ask. From a bass player to a bass player, pick
Mhm.
or fingers when it comes to playing? Do you play with the pick, or do you
Oh,
play?
I never played with pick. I never played with the pick for bass, right? I never
Yeah,
played with the pick. I always use the fingers, no. So
yeah,
that I think it does, it gives you, I don't
that
know,
feel.
it
Yeah,
gives you a more feel. Yeah, yeah, more feel. It makes you feel more of a bass player, no?
yeah.
If you use if you use yeah, fingers.
Because that's a very suicidal question for
I don't
bass
know.
players. I'm sure you know that. You know that.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah, it
It's just me, I don't think you're a real bass player if you use picks.
yeah. I mean, in some songs. I mean, when you mentioned Van Halen, uh,
Yeah.
Van Halen stuff, there's a lot of pick transitioning into some of the heavier stuff with the not Sammy Hagar, the David Lee Roth. I think there was some heavy stuff from
Yep.
then on out. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but
But it's really more of because you wanted to create a specific sound.
yeah,
That's okay. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. But if you're just mainly playing bass,
yeah,
uh, you just use your fingers.
yeah. That's
I
a
don't know.
shout
That's
out.
just me. I'm not. Remember,
Yeah.
I'm not a musician. I'm just an aspiring. So.
Mind you, that's coming from two bass players. It's all about feeling. It's more like a relationship. Actually, that's one thing.
Yeah.
When you're with your
Yeah.
instrument, it's more like a relationship. And I think I've learned that over time, especially when you're playing music, is that you build that relationship with the instrument to the point that it becomes like kind of like more like a relationship, like a building relationship with the instruments and that connection, that connectivity. So each note that you
Yeah.
play,
Yeah.
that comes out of your fingers and then comes out as sound. It comes like it becomes one thing fascinating about music that yeah is
Hmm.
it's a huge it's a huge thing lately. Lately I've been listening to a lot of music, and I think I've reached the age that I've stopped listening to hard rock for some weird reason, and I started settling down and
Okay.
starting doing due diligence on funk, you know. And I've
Hmm.
watched like I think 4 or 5 documentaries about funk, which is kind of fascinating
Yeah.
in itself. And it's one conversation that I've always wanted to talk about. I think I covered this with some of the people as well, my fellow people that I've interviewed. Is that the idea of funk is it, it, as a listener, if you ask someone what is funk, they automatically say it's dance music. There's nothing else to it. It's just dance. It makes you dance. And the funny thing about that is, if you do that due diligence and you dig into the main ideology and the philosophy of it, it's really interesting because
Hmm.
during that time it was the black segregation and the history of Martin Luther King, and then James Brown and all these other musicians came up with the
Hmm.
idea of funk. And then of course when it funk died down, and then disco died down, and then we have hip hop, which is kind of the
Yeah.
renaissance of funk in itself. It's really fascinating. I mean,
Yeah.
the history of that music is. And that's one thing I think some people don't do much when it comes to music. They listen to it, okay, understand. And is more about feeling feeling the history of thing. I'm sure, yeah, when you sing and when you play a music, especially those romantic music, I'm sure deep down inside you, you get that chills, and you feel that song. I'm sure
Hmm.
you agree with me, especially when
Hmm.
you've backed up a lot.
Yeah.
I'm sure, I have a feeling you backed up more than 20, 50 plus musicians who've expressed themselves in the form of art, which is
Yeah.
uh, uh, this thing. And yeah, over the years, it has that. The funny thing about that, it blends your your emotional connection, and and it has that link with numbers, especially when you're a drummer, you're always counting. And
Yeah.
yeah, when you're practicing drums, it's very hard to get the hard to get the independence done, and then you're counting, especially when the time signature is 6 8, and it goes up to 13 10 13
Hmm.
and all that stuff. It's kind of wow. And yeah, it's fascinating. Music has always been a fascinating thing. It's one phenomenal thing to talk about. And yeah, wow, we've had an amazing conversation here, Ike's. Um, I hope you
Mhm.
come back and we would have a conversation. Hopefully, let's have a
Yeah.
roundtable podcast with other musicians and hopefully some other
Mhm.
podcasters as well. Let's
Yeah,
see.
sure.
Yeah. But before we end up this conversation, if my listeners are interested in connecting with you, probably wanting to have a jam session with you, how do they find you on social media?
I'm not sure about that jam session, but they can start following my social media pages. They can find me at the Inspiring Leader, whether that's on FB or IG. Or if they want to give me a shout out on Twitter, that would be at the Inspiring LDR. Because we have limited characters in Twitter,
True.
so we can start there, or you can just PM me, reach out to me if you want the the inspiring leader. You want to listen to the inspiring leader podcast, you can find me on Spotify, Anchor, all the major podcast platforms. And then of course also with podcast PH and the Philippine Podcast Directory. Shout out to all those guys, so
Yeah.
taking care of all the podcasters out there.
Anyway, uh, thank you, Ike's, for having this time to have a conversation with me.
Thank you,
Uh,
Rajiv. It's
you
a
are a
pleasure to
legend.
be on your show.
You are a legend. From the beginning to the end, I gotta admit you're a legend. So please don't shoot me. Yeah. And hope to see you soon again. And for those who are tuning in, I hope you learned a thing or two in this conversation. With that in mind, folks, cheers and stay safe.